The voice memo had been playing for 11 seconds before I realized it wasn't meant for me. I know that sounds like the kind of thing a person says to make themselves look less guilty. But I was standing in the break room at 6:47 on a Tuesday evening, holding Nadia's phone because she'd asked me to grab it from the charger on her desk while she finished a call in the conference room, and the audio just started. No warning, no label, just her voice coming out of the speaker, low and a little unsteady, like she'd recorded it late at night when she thought no one was listening, which, obviously, she had. I should have stopped it immediately, I know that. I set the phone face down on the counter, which did absolutely nothing because the speaker was on the back. Then I picked it up again to pause it, which meant I had to look at the screen, which meant I saw the title she'd given the file. Things I can't say out loud, do not play. I paused it at 11 seconds, but by then I'd already heard enough. Her voice, clear as anything. The problem is, I've been in love with him for probably 2 years, and he still introduces me to people as his work friend, and I don't know if that's an accident or if that's just how he sees me, and either way, I think I need to stop. 11 seconds. I set the phone on the counter and stood there looking at the coffee machine like it had answers. Her name was Nadia Okafor, and she had been my closest friend at Alderton Design for 3 years, 2 months, and at that point, approximately 11 days. I wasn't counting. I'd just started at the firm the same week she got promoted to senior associate, and we'd been placed in adjacent offices during the renovation that nobody asked for, and everyone complained about. And somewhere between sharing a wall and sharing a parking garage, and eventually sharing most of our lunch breaks and a truly unreasonable number of late nights finishing client decks, she became the person I called first when anything happened. Not my college friends, not my brother, Nadia. She was the kind of person who remembered the names of everyone's family members and asked about them specifically. She kept a list of coffee orders for every person on our floor because she said it made people feel seen, which I thought was a little much until I watched 3 different coworkers visibly brighten when she handed them exactly what they wanted without being asked. She was meticulous about everything except her desk, which looked like a paper avalanche had recently occurred and nobody had called for help. She argued about fonts with the kind of intensity most people reserve for things that actually matter. She was almost always right about the fonts. People at the office had been making comments for at least a year. Our manager Barry, who was a good project lead and a terrible observer of human dynamics, had once said in a team meeting that Nadia and I operated like a married couple, which got a laugh, and Nadia had smiled and I had also smiled, and we had both very pointedly not looked at each other for the rest of the meeting. Her friend Tamsin, who I'd met at the holiday party, pulled me aside once near the shrimp cocktail and said, "You know she talks about you constantly, right?" I said that was good to hear. Tamsin's gave me a look that clearly communicated she thought I was an idiot and then went back to the party. I filed that under things people say and moved on. The thing about Nadia and me was that it worked, whatever it was. I didn't need to define it because defining it meant risking it, and I had watched enough friendships fracture over let's be honest with each other to know that honesty, poorly timed, could take something perfect and make it permanent in the wrong way. So I kept showing up. I kept being her person. I kept telling myself that was enough, and mostly I believed it, except at 2 a.m. Sometimes when I was being honest in the way you can only be honest when no one's listening. I had apparently underestimated how long she'd been doing the same thing. 11 seconds, 2 years. She came back into the break room 4 minutes later, still a little flustered from whatever the call had been, her blazer pushed up to the elbows, hair escaping from the clip she'd been fighting with all afternoon. She stopped when she saw my face. "Hey," she said, "did you find it?" I held up her phone. She looked at it, then at me. Her expression didn't change for a moment, and then something in it shifted, very slightly, in a way I couldn't name yet. "The memo started playing," I said. I stopped it. Nadia stood very still. "How much?" she asked. Her voice was completely level. That was worse than if it hadn't been. 11 seconds. She looked at the floor. Something moved across her face that I didn't want to identify as embarrassment because she had nothing to be embarrassed about, but that's what it was. Her jaw tightened just slightly at the corner. "Nadia," I said. "Don't." She said it quietly, not angry, just contained. like she was holding something carefully so it wouldn't spill. She reached out and took the phone from my hand and tucked it into her blazer pocket. "I need a minute." "Okay." She went to the coffee machine and stood in front of it without pressing anything. I stayed where I was. The refrigerator hummed. Someone in the hallway laughed at something, the sound drifting past the door and disappearing. After about 30 seconds, she said, without turning around, "That file is private." "I know. I'm sorry. It started on its own when I picked it up. I know you didn't do it on purpose. But..." She finally turned around. Her arms were crossed, but not defensively, more like she was holding herself together. "But I recorded that at midnight on a Wednesday, and I never meant for anyone to hear it, and now you have, and I don't really know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything with it." She looked at me. "That's not true." She was right. It wasn't true. We both knew that. I said, "Can I ask you something? You're going to ask it either way." 2 years, I said. Nadia closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she opened them and looked at the ceiling briefly, like she was doing the math on something, and then back at me, give or take. I stood there with that for a moment. 2 years. We'd been to 3 firm retreats in that time. I'd helped her move apartments. She'd talked me through a genuinely bad quarter at work, when I thought I was about to get quietly reassigned. We'd driven to Connecticut for a client visit and gotten lost because neither of us trusted GPS, and both of us were too stubborn to admit it until we were 40 minutes in the wrong direction. And somehow, that had turned into a 3-hour conversation about everything and nothing. And I remembered driving home afterward, thinking that I hadn't felt that easy with anyone in a long time. 2 years. "I introduce you as my work friend," I said. It came out flatter than I meant it to. She winced. "Yeah. I know." I didn't. That wasn't me trying to say anything. That's what I default to. And I don't think I ever stopped to think about whether it was accurate. "It's fine. It's not fine." "No," she said, "it's not. But I wasn't going to make it your problem." Something about that particular sentence was hard to hear. Make it your problem. Like she'd been carrying this around for 2 years and categorizing it under her own business. Something to be managed and contained, not something to be shared. I said, "Can I say something that might be badly worded?" Better than 11 seconds of my private audio, so sure. That surprised a short laugh out of me. The corner of her mouth moved, just slightly, before she stopped it. "The fact that I'm standing here right now and not looking for the exit," I said, "that should probably tell you something." Nadia looked at me steadily. "It might just mean you're polite. I'm not that polite." She almost smiled. "That's true. You argued with a client for 20 minutes about serif fonts last month. They were wrong, they were paying us. They were wrong, and they were paying us." I took a breath. "Nadia, I'm not standing here trying to figure out how to make this less awkward. I'm standing here because hearing that I stopped. Started again. It landed differently than it should have if none of it was already true for me too." She didn't move, and I said, "The reason I've never said anything is the same reason you made that file and labeled it Do Not Play. Because this works. What we have. And I was terrified to touch it." The refrigerator hummed. Someone in another part of the office was on a call, the sound of their voice faint and indistinct. Nadia looked down at the counter for a long moment. Then she looked up. "You're not just saying this because you feel like you owe me something? I'm saying it because you recorded it at midnight on a Wednesday and called it things you can't say out loud. And I've been writing the same list in my head for 2 years without ever recording anything." She stared at me. "I'm a little less organized about it than you are," I said. She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh but was close to one. "That is genuinely the least romantic thing anyone has ever said to me." "I know. I told you it would be badly worded." "You did." She uncrossed her arms. The line of her shoulders eased, fractionally, like something had been held very tightly and was now being allowed to loosen. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the phone in her blazer pocket, then at me. "I made that recording 3 days after the Morrison presentation." I thought back. 6 weeks ago, maybe. We'd stayed until almost 10 to finish the pitched deck, and then we'd sat in the parking garage on the hood of her car for another 40 minutes because neither of us wanted to drive home yet. We'd talked about her brother's new apartment in Austin and whether I was going to adopt the houseplant. I'd been babysitting for a friend who clearly wasn't coming back for it. Nothing important. Nothing that should have mattered. That night in the parking garage, she said, "You fell asleep." I didn't fall asleep. You absolutely fell asleep. For like 7 minutes. You were mid-sentence and then she gestured vaguely. I was resting my eyes. You snored. I don't snore. You snored, she said, and her voice had gone a little softer. And then you woke up and didn't even apologize. You just picked up exactly where you left off, and you had no idea how. She stopped, pressed her lips together. It was a very normal moment. That's the thing. It was just a completely ordinary Tuesday night, and you fell asleep on my car and kept talking like nothing had happened, and I drove home and recorded that file because I didn't know what else to do with it. That landed somewhere. It was going to stay for a while. I remember that night, I said. Yeah, I remember not wanting to leave. She looked at me. Me neither. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Outside the break room window, the city was doing what it does at 7 p.m. in October. All orange light and the kind of cold that hasn't committed yet, the last bit of warmth still clinging to the end of the day. I'd been in that office through 4 October evenings now, and I couldn't have told you much about most of them except that this one was going to be the one I remembered. So, Nadia said. So, I said. This is strange. A little bit. She tilted her head slightly. You work 12 feet from me. I know. We share a parking garage, I know. Barry is going to be insufferable about this. I laughed. Actually laughed, the real kind. Barry is going to act like he predicted it. He's going to bring it up in every project meeting for a year. He brought up that I was left-handed for 4 months after he noticed. He did do that. She smiled, and it was the full version, the one she didn't always let out all the way, and it did something to the air in the room. For the record, she said, I wasn't planning on doing anything about it. The file. I was going to let it sit there until I felt differently, or until it just became background noise. How was that plan going? She considered this seriously. Poorly. Yeah. She looked at me for a moment, like she was deciding something. Then she said, I don't know how to do this carefully. Neither do I said, but I'd rather figure it out with you than keep pretending I'm not trying to. Nadia looked at me steadily. She had the kind of eyes that didn't give things away fast. She made you wait for it, which I'd always thought was one of the more accurate things about her, the way she thought before she committed to anything. But she was committing to something now, I could see it, the moment she stopped looking for the reason not to. Okay, she said. Quiet. Like a door that had been stuck finally opening. Okay? Yeah. A small breath. Okay, I stepped forward. Not far. Just enough to close some of the distance that had been perfectly reasonable for 3 years and was now unnecessary. She didn't step back. Can I? I started. Yes, she said before I finished. I kissed her. Right there, in the break room of Alderton Design at 6:52 on a Tuesday evening, under the fluorescent light that had been flickering since March and that nobody had fixed yet. Next to the coffee machine that made a noise like a small engine failing whenever it brewed anything. It was not a dramatic location. It was not a cinematic moment. It was a little awkward for exactly half a second, the kind of awkward that happens when two people who've been careful for a long time stop being careful. And then, it wasn't awkward at all. When we pulled back, she was looking at me with an expression I didn't have a category for yet. Something like relief. Something like there you are. The flickering light is very romantic, she said. Maintenance has been notified. Since March? It's on the list. She laughed. And I thought, I've heard her laugh hundreds of times. In meetings and parking garages and over bad takeout at 9 o'clock on project deadlines, but this was a different version of it, lighter somehow. Like she'd set something down. She pulled her phone out of her pocket and looked at it. I'm going to delete that file. You don't have to. No, She paused, thought about it, then put the phone back. Actually, maybe I'll keep it. As evidence. Evidence of what? That I figured it out first. I looked at her. You know, I was getting there. 11 seconds of audio says otherwise. The audio is 11 seconds. The actual math is 2 years on both sides. She considered this. Fair, she allowed. Split decision. We stood there for another moment, neither of us entirely sure what the protocol was for what happened next. The office was mostly empty by now, just the ambient hum of a building settling into evening. Her blazer was still pushed up to the elbows. Her hair clip had lost the last fight and given up entirely. Everything looked exactly like it had an hour ago. Nothing felt remotely the same. Do you want to get dinner? I asked. She blinked. Are we calling it dinner? Or are we calling it something else now? I'm calling it dinner where I no longer have to pretend I don't notice when you laugh at something I say. Nadia looked at me. You noticed that every time. She pressed her lips together, and it was very clear she was trying not to look pleased and not entirely succeeding. There's that Thai place on Clement that you said you wanted to try. The one with the parking situation? There's street parking 2 blocks over. You've thought about this. I think about a lot of things, she said, picking up her bag from where she'd left it on the counter, her tone perfectly normal. And then, very quietly, like a footnote, including this, for a while now. I picked up my jacket. Let's go. The parking situation on Clement Street was exactly as bad as described. We circled twice, found a spot on the 3rd try, and had to walk 4 blocks in the October cold because I'd misjudged the distance. Nadia kept up fine, her scarf pulled up around her chin, and at some point between the 2nd block and the 3rd, her hand found mine, not dramatically, not announced, just there. Like it had been there before, and we were finally acknowledging it. The restaurant was small and too warm and smelled like lemongrass, and the guy at the front told us the wait was 35 minutes. We said fine. We stood outside on the sidewalk and talked for all 35 of them about nothing specific and everything important, the way we always had, except now there was nothing being left out. Over dinner, she told me that she'd almost said something once. 8 months ago, when I'd helped her move and we'd ended up sitting on the floor of her empty old apartment at midnight eating pizza from the box, because neither of us had wanted to deal with the drive yet. I told her I remembered that night specifically. She asked why. I said because I'd sat in my car afterward in the parking lot of my building for almost 20 minutes before going inside, and I hadn't been able to explain why at the time. She was quiet for a second. Then, you should have said something, so should you. I know. She stabbed a piece of tofu thoughtfully. We're both idiots, probably, but equal idiots, completely symmetrical idiocy. That's almost comforting. Barry did find out. He found out the way Barry found out everything, which was by noticing something at a meeting and then announcing his deduction like he was presenting findings. He said, and this is verbatim, I knew it. I said it 18 months ago and nobody listened to me. Nobody had the energy to fact-check this claim. He brought it up twice in the following month during project debriefs, apropos of nothing, and then, perhaps sensing that neither of us was going to give him the reaction he was hoping for, gradually let it go. Nadia was right about the parking. She was right about a lot of things, which I already knew, and which changed slightly in meaning once I stopped having to file it under professional respect and could just let it be what it was. One of my favorite things about her, the voice memo file on her phone, sat in the folder for another 3 weeks before she finally deleted it. She told me the night she did, not with any particular ceremony, just mentioned it while we were watching something neither of us was really paying attention to. I said I was a little sad about that. She asked why. I said because it was the reason we were here. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, we would have gotten here, you think? Yeah. She pulled the blanket up a little. Maybe not for another 2 years, but yeah. I thought about that. The version of the next 2 years where the phone didn't autoplay. Where I'd handed it back and she'd come out of the conference room and we'd gone back to our respective offices and everything had continued forward on the track it was already on. Tuesday evenings and parking garages and client decks and everything left unsaid. I'm glad it played, I said. I'm glad you didn't walk out of the break room. I wasn't going to walk out. You didn't know that before you knew what you were hearing. That was true. I hadn't known. I'd stood there at the coffee machine with 11 seconds of her voice, and something had gone very still and very clear, and I think some part of me had understood what that stillness meant even before I let myself name it. No, I said. But once I heard it, yeah, she said quietly. Once you heard it. The thing about the moment a door opens is that you can't really reconstruct exactly when the handle turned. You just know that it was closed, and then it wasn't, and that the room on the other side had been there the whole time, waiting to be walked into. There's a version of this story where the phone stays in my pocket without playing, where I hand it over without incident, where we both go home and add 2 more items to lists, labeled Do Not Say out loud. I used to be very good at that version. I'd been running it for almost 3 years. Nadia had been running it for 2. I don't know which of us would have cracked first. Honestly, I'd put money on her. She's more organized than I am, but it wasn't either of us. It was a voice memo that autoplayed at 6:47 on a Tuesday in October, in a break room under a flickering light that maintenance has since fixed. And whatever credit you want to give to that, to the phone, to the bad settings, to whoever engineered autoplay in the first place, I'll take it. Some things need a little help getting started, so here's what I'm asking you. If you were standing in that break room, holding her phone, and you heard those 11 seconds, what would you have done? Would you have said something? Would you have put the phone down and walked out and never mentioned it? Drop it in the comments. And if this one got you, like the video and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.